Hello, everybody. Welcome to What Would Your Ideal World Be? A new podcast which examines many important people and the important things in their lives, what they think about most current trends at the moment, what they think about certain subject matters, and of course, what their ideal world would be. Today's guest is Luke Robert Black. Robert Black is a writer and Conservative Party activist, and is also the founder and former leader of the think tank Blue Beyond, of which is concentrated in engaging both younger and non-London based members of the party, and came to be in 2019. He's also written for several publications, like the aforementioned Blue Beyond, The Mallard, and most notably, the I newspaper. Okay, thank you for coming on, by the way.
No worries. I'm really really flattered to be asked.
So the first question I wanted to ask you, if you don't mind, and forgive me for using the colloquialism, is what was your red pill moment? What got you involved in politics, and what got you engaged?
I suppose it was watching the David Cameron speech in 2010. I'm showing how old I am here. He was sort of across the water in Downing Street, sort of looking over at the Houses of Parliament. And he gave this incredible, rousing speech. And I just thought to myself, wow, like this is really an exciting moment. And I think also I really bought into the big society generally as an idea. I loved the idea of people coming together and doing something because it's intrinsically the right thing to do. And I really got inspired by that. And I suppose that's probably where it began. And then I went to university, did loads of politics there. And then I kind of, unfortunately, after the death of my friend Elliot Johnson, I kind of took a bit of a time out of politics, didn't really feel that engaged again until I watched Theresa May's speech at Downing Street. And then that sort of engaged me again once more. So both two prime ministers, I suppose, just goes to show those kind of moments in politics do matter.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. And why, if you don't mind me asking, and I'm a member as well, before any declaration or whatever, is why are you a member of the Conservative Party specifically?
Gosh, wow, what a question. Because I believe in its fundamental core principles of hard work, of individualism. I believe that it is the most family-oriented party, and I think families are really crucial and important structures within our society.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I suppose more recently, definitely because of Brexit, it's something I have been really passionate about for as long as I can remember. Even prior to being consciously a conservative, I've always been very, very Eurosceptic, even from a very young age. Our party is the only party that was actually interested in really honouring the referendum result, and B, implementing it and in the way that we have, and seizing back as much control from the European Union as possible. So yeah, I suppose that's why.
What got you? What was there any specific event that got you involved in sort of the Eurosceptic movement, or was it just a bunch of things you noticed that got you interested?
Do you know what engaged me was when I went to the European Parliament with the Nottingham University Conservatives. This amazing MEP, Emma McClarkin, who I think now she's actually involved in British beer or something else. I think she's left politics, sadly, but she was the MEP there. And she toured us around Parliament. And we sat in this building, and this very, very, very like articulate man told us all of the fantastic things about the European Union and all of this stuff. And didn't really know much about the EU at that point. And I put up my hand and I said, when are the elections for the president? And he just looked at me blankly. He was like, well, there aren't any. And I was like a bit naive. I was a bit confused. I was like, what do you mean there aren't any elections? I don't understand. Like, you've just explained that this is the executive. They essentially decide the agenda for what the legislative in the European Parliament votes for, but we don't get to pick that person. He was like, no, that person is not elected. And I was like, what? Sat in this room thinking, this is ludicrous. And that for me was when the penny dropped. I was like, we need to get out of this.
Fair enough. Sounds like a Libyan election under Gaddafi, really. But anyway, the next question I wanted to ask you is about your think tank Blue Beyond, which I'm a member of as well. You were the founder of this think tank Blue Beyond, and what were your motivations for setting it up in the first place?
So I was watching a Twitter interaction between a young 15, 16-year-old conservative. He was living down in Kent, in Canterbury, and he was talking to some parliamentary staffers, and he was saying, I really want to get more involved in politics, but I can't afford the train fare into Westminster. And they were like, oh, what? Well, like, just save up and just buy the train fare, like, and come in. And he was like, well, no, like, I don't get that much pocket money. And it's a lot of money to go. It's a really long way for me to come into Westminster to go to like a drinks event. And I'm underage, so I can't attend anyway. And the staffers weren't hugely nice, if I'm honest. They were quite patronizing towards him. And I just messaged him saying, oh, like, I'm really sorry that this is the response that you're getting. Like, this is a ludicrous situation whereby members of your own party who have this proximity to MPs are kind of laughing in your face because you don't have enough money to get a train fare in from Canterbury to London. And I got so angry about that. I started messaging my friend Natasha Tsitsi, and she was saying the same thing to me as well. She was from London, lived in Hampstead, and we were both like, look, we're really lucky. We live so close to London. We've got all of this access and opportunity. But if that's how someone in Canterbury feels about politics, how does someone in Cardiff or Murray or Aberdeen or Belfast feel? Like that, like, Canterbury is reasonably close to London. You can probably get in with just over an hour on the train. But if you're from Cardiff and you're expected to come into London to feel connected to the Conservative Party, you're going to feel really detached. So that's kind of where it started. And I just began tweeting about how frustrated I was that people like me who lived in London had all of this access to all of the Adam Smith Institute drinks and the IEA drinks and all of this stuff, which is amazing. But it wasn't something that you would be able to enjoy if you were under the age of 18 and living in a town about 3 or 4 hours outside of London. So loads of young Tories were saying, yeah, no, actually, our MPs never really visited us. We've got a YC branch of 3 people. No one really helps us. When we go to a local association, we're just basically treated as campaign fodder. And then, you know, I started chatting to more and more people, and I felt like there was actually this huge detach more generally in politics. It was not just the Conservative Party's fault, it's Labour and the Lib Dems too. There was a real sense of detachment from Westminster and from London. And I found that scandalous. So I think that's kind of where it started. And I didn't know what to do with this. I just realized that there were loads of people who felt like this. And I wanted to do something about it. It started off as just a WhatsApp group. And then it just morphed into basically being a wider think tank group movement, sort of youth wing, whatever you kind of want to call it. And I just felt that we needed to do something, because when you joined the Conservative Party as a young Tory, you don't even get, you might do now, I haven't obviously joined because I've been a member, but you didn't even get a welcome email. You know, you just pay your £5 and then you'll remember it in name only. And then, yes, you get to vote for whether it's going to be Boris Johnson or Jeremy Hunt in the leadership election. But I just felt like we've got to do more than that. And I knew that there were so many amazing people in the youth wing, from like the left of the party right up to the right of the party, doing incredible things, setting up publications and blogs and groups and campaigns. And I thought, God, the engagement is there. There's an untapped resource of people who are just passionate about this. Why aren't we engaging them? So that's kind of how it started and where it came from, despite the fact that I live in London, obviously. But I just knew that my access was a restricted access to London, and that wasn't fair.
Mm-hmm. What do you think then the major 3 parties have, like they're more hires up, maybe have these sort of attitudes then about just being all London centric, given the fact that they have to, you know, they have to win a good chunk of the country anyway, let alone its young people?
Well, yeah, I think that's what felt so odd for us, particularly as the Conservative Party. And this, when I set up Blue Beyond, this was before 2019. So this is before the red wall kind of element came into focus. But so many members were from St Helens and, you know, from Chorley and from Pudsey and places like that. And these weren't your traditional Tory areas. I was blown away by the fact that we had so many young Tories in Liverpool. And I just thought, this is so silly that we are so focused on London. And that has definitely changed a bit over the last 2 years because of COVID and probably other factors. But back then it really did feel like you needed to be living in this city to feel connected to the party. And when we polled young Tories, we did a poll, it ends up being about 1,200 in total. most of them said that they felt disengaged and disconnected from the youth wing, and I do think that that is largely due to geography and being far away from the action, so to speak. But hopefully that will change, given that the party is moving its HQ to Leeds, and I really welcome that.
What sort of what policies do you think could be seen with by doing stuff like that, like moving their HQ to Leeds and stuff like that? What sort of do you think it might make them a little bit less like London centric and make them focus on some of these more like northern areas as well? Then beyond the fact they could get more young people on board.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really positive move, because to be a one nation Tory, which Boris tells us he is, and to level up, i.e., redistribute some of the access and opportunities, make sure everybody's got the same access to politics and to life, and to get rid of some of the long overdue imbalances on the basis of regional differences and socioeconomic backgrounds. You need to kind of walk the walk as well. And I think if the party was only willing to have its HQ in London, if civil servants were only willing to live and work in London, you would fairly ask the question, well, are you really that interested in levelling up? And are you really that interested in winning our vote? So I do hope that it's a largely symbolic move that shows to the country, look, the Tories, we are a party that is not just for London, that is for the whole of the United Kingdom. And you can come and visit us in Leeds. We're not just in London, we're in Leeds too. And I really hope that will kind of change people's perceptions about whether or not they can get involved in politics if they live in or out of London, I suppose.
Yeah, sure. What does being a one nation Tory mean, do you think, in this day and age, given the fact that there's been that sort of meaning has changed so much from, say, its origins in the Disraeli era?
I mean, Jake Scott and other people who are very, very intelligent and understand political ideology would give a far more nuanced response than mine. But what I would say is it's definitely become a catch-all term. It feels detached from when Benjamin Disraeli coined the term initially, to be honest. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing or a bad thing. But I think Boris Johnson's I suppose, definition of a one nation Tory would be, I guess, to be a bit more statist than your Thatcherite types, to be a bit more interventionist as well than your Thatcherite types, to be possibly more socially liberal. I think for Boris, possibly he sees one nation Toryism as being in those first few letters for the whole of the United Kingdom. I think he ties that very much to his levelling up agenda, which is something that I think all Conservatives can get behind, really, whether they are Thatcherite, whether they're a social conservative, whether they're a one nation Tory. But it has definitely detached from those Disraeli times for sure. But then that was 200 years ago.
And do you think that the party's sort of in more recent years, as you might have been alluding to earlier, moving away from sort of Thatcherism more towards sort of, as you said, more status sort of view on things, because they feel that is more appealing to, say, their new constituency areas in the north and some other groups, for example, than, say, Thatcherism would be?
Yeah, I think you're right, actually. I mean, parties are coalitions of ideas. They are an aggregation of values and beliefs. And at different times in that party's life, different subgroups will come to the ascendancy. And we've had the Thatcherite era, and then that obviously bled into probably Labour's politics as well. And then when David Cameron was our prime minister, we had your sort of your neoliberalism, if you will, big society group come to the ascendancy. With Theresa May, we had your one nation Tory reform group come to the ascendancy. Now I would describe this as more of a blue collar conservative government. It's definitely much more left-wing economically than before. One thing I do find so interesting is this. I always read that the Conservative Party is moving right socially. I couldn't disagree with that more. I don't particularly see this, and what I find so fascinating is that that's actually quite beneficial for the Tories, because it means that they could sort of foxtrot and kind of outfox Labour on the economic issues, whilst also still like retaining onto that right wing, which I think will become more and more disgruntled as time goes on, given the leftward shift in the economic views. So the more and more The Guardian and various types like that berate the Tories for being harder on the right for social issues, even though I don't think they are. It's actually quite beneficial for Boris, because it means that he can really kind of become a party for everybody, and be a big tent party, which I think is definitely the direction he is going in.
Mm-hmm. And do you find it fascinating, this thing about like a lot of right-wing parties, or traditional sort of either traditional right-wing parties or sort of new right-wing parties, are leaning more sort of left economically and doing very well? You see, for example, not just Boris, but sort of arguably when Trump was in office, there was stuff like economic protectionism he was championing and whatnot. Or if you look at Poland as well, I think it's called the Law and Justice Party, I could be wrong on that, who are economically left-wing as well. I'm not saying you have to necessarily like them, I'm just saying they're more economically left-wing than maybe many of their right-wing peers were. Do you think where do you think that development has come from?
I think it's long overstanding, a long time coming development, really. I think it's because for a long time, the way we've understood politics has not been that useful. Dividing things simply into left and right isn't the best way of viewing things, and trying to explain to the general population that politics exists on an axis on possibly a libertarian, authoritarian slant versus distributive versus non-distributive is possibly a bit more complicated. But I think the reason why that's a long time coming is because Labour for many, many, many years assumed that its traditional core vote was a very socially liberal, economically liberal group. And I think that has never been true, really. There's always been a socially conservative kind of way of feeling amongst people that have sort of lent more left on economic issues. And I think for a long time we've assumed that just because you're left-wing slightly on the economy doesn't mean that you'll be left-wing when it comes to social issues as well. And I think Labour, misunderstood that for a very, very long time, compounded by the fact that they ignored for many, many years the worries about immigration and dismissed people's worries about immigration. And then it came to a grand sort of denouement in Brexit, where so many Labour MPs in northern seats openly voted against what their constituency had voted for in the referendum. And I think that was just a sort of a climax of a long, probably decades of Labour misunderstanding their voters. So yeah, I'm not surprised that that's happening. It's difficult at the moment because of COVID. Everyone has shifted left. It will be interesting in 5 or so years, when fingers crossed we're back to normal, to see whether the inverted commas traditional right are still flirting with more interventionist policies. I think we'll have to kind of wait and see with that.
On one brief anecdote, actually, you're talking about sort of like Labour voters being left-wing economics, but maybe a lot more right-wing socially. I think sometimes that could apply to their governments, because if I'm not mistaken, Clement Attlee's government in 1945 was, if I'm not mistaken, supported stuff like grammar schools per se, and it was supportive of the death penalty as well. It's just quite interesting. But one thing I have to ask you, and I hope this doesn't get you in a lot of trouble, given with both party members, what's your opinions on Boris's performance as Prime Minister so far, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, sure. The hardest jobs as a Prime Minister for a very, very, very long time. That's what I would start by saying to caveat anything I say. He's clearly had to be a Prime Minister in very extraordinary circumstances. I have a very love-hate relationship with Boris's leadership, if I'm honest. There are times when I think, yes, this is why I voted for you in 2019. And I feel, it's really, really positive about what we're doing. And I feel really engaged with what we're doing. And there have been moments like that with all of the Freeport stuff or the vaccine rollout, things like that I've really kind of felt pride in. And then there have been moments where I have been things like lockdown policy and education as well, chiefly. That's something I really feel that we have done badly on in the COVID pandemic. And I think that we were complacent towards schooling for a long time and gave in to the trade unions very, very early on their demands with sending children home from school. And I think that those things I've found a real sense of dissatisfaction. So it's a difficult question to answer. I would like to think that in a different circumstances, Boris would have been one of our great prime ministers. He's still got time to do that. So I will remain positive. Whether that's naive of me or not, it's kind of for you to decide.
That's fine. And getting back to Blue Beyond for a minute, if you don't mind me doing so.
Sure.
What do you think its biggest successes were when you were in charge, if you don't mind me asking?
I mean, when I was in charge, I had a huge team of people underneath me who did fantastic work, and everything that we did was largely in part due to what they did. So I can't take too much credit for the successes that we did for just me, because I had some incredible people working underneath me. But I think one of our biggest successes was definitely the Conservative Party conference in 2019. We hosted a string of events, but what was really important for that was just getting young Tories to sit on a panel with an MP and alongside think tankers. One thing, and it's something that I think Jake Scott tweeted recently that actually really resonated with me. He said, what's the point of a panel if everybody on it agrees? And I couldn't agree with that more. There's no point in getting a group of people to sit on a panel together if they're all going to agree with each other and say the same thing. What we did with our Petra Kucha debates is we had someone like Alexander Bowen, who's possibly not a Tory party anymore, but he set up Tories for Climate Action. We had him, he was like 16 or 17, sat on a panel alongside Guy Opperman MP. And I think that sent a really empowering message to young people that, like, you don't need to be a parliamentary staffer. You don't need to live in London. You could, in Alex's case, you could be a sixth former in Yorkshire and you could still have your voice heard and you'd be on the same level playing field as Guy Opperman MP. And I think that was probably one of our biggest successes. Second success, I'd say, was just our press coverage. Something I felt, again, really passionately about was that there was so much concentration of opportunity to get Conservative young voices in the media for Londoners, and there weren't that many for those who were outside of London. So as a result, you'd see the same faces kind of on the TV all the time, which is great for those individuals, but I couldn't help but feel there weren't enough regional voices expressing Conservative views online and in our newspapers and TV and so on. And we managed to get, hundreds of young Tories in a variety of different regional and national newspapers. I think a huge source of pride for me was watching Matt Eads, who I think was 17 at the time, from Birmingham, on Channel 4, representing the Conservative Party, I think alongside Jamelia, obscurely, who was doing Labour, but he did a fantastic job. And I just thought, wow, isn't that so inspiring, again, to have a 17-year-old sixth former from Birmingham on Channel 4 saying, I'm a Tory. And I was just like, that is really empowering. And that hopefully would make other young people feel empowering. And then my third and final one is just because the other day at Tory Party conference, I won't name her because I don't want to embarrass her, but someone came up to me and she said to me, you helped me so much last year with a press op that you'd got for me. You walked me through what to be wary of when on TV. You really helped me kind of practice my points I was going to say. You made me feel really confident for that. And as a result, I got to go on Sky News. Thank you so much for that. And I was like, wow, this is exactly what I wanted to do, which is to just find young Tories who, in her case, she's living in the Northwest, who wouldn't traditionally get on TV because of where they live, giving them that opportunity, but also for the party showing the world that we've got all these incredible young people who don't just live in London, they live all over the UK and they've got Conservative values. Here's what they have to say. So I'd say that those are my three things. Oh, and I suppose the fourth and final thing would just be the amount of money that we raised for charity. We did a lot of money raising for charity, which was great, several £1,000s. Again, I had an incredible team of people to help me with that. So it was their success as much as mine.
I hope you don't remember me asking this, but on the flip side, do you have any regrets from that time or not really?
Yes, I do. I think one of my biggest regrets is just the amount of effort and time and work it was. When you're on the end receipt of something, I don't think you realize how much work goes into something. And if you talk to people at, for example, the British Conservation Alliance or the Mallard or 1828, if you talk to the people who work there, they will tell you how much work it takes to do this kind of stuff. It was stressful and tiring, and I would do a long day of work and come home and then spend 3-4 hours in the evening, often until midnight, drafting graphics of a young Tory that I probably would never meet to get that up online. It was a lot of work. I don't regret it, but I do, I think, regret like some of the late nights, because it was stressful juggling it all in a full-time job, to be honest.
Fair enough. And on the final question about Blue Beyond, if you don't mind me asking, is I hope she doesn't mind me naming her, but you've now handed over the torch to Olivia Lervo, if I'm not pronouncing that wrong, I hope, who started running Blue Beyond earlier this year. What advice did you give her?
What advice I give her? I told her to do a few things, really. One was to not change. She is a proud Bolton girl who went to the University of Liverpool and set up the University Conservative Society there. If that is no measure of determination, then I don't know what it is. So my first was to not change. My second was to just not forget what we set the organisation up for, and that was to just essentially elevate young Tory voices and help young Tories to communicate and to connect with each other. And I suppose the third thing I just said to her is just make sure that, everyone is having fun. At the end of the day, it's got to be fun, because you're doing it in your own spare time. Young Tories can sometimes take things quite seriously, which isn't actually a bad thing. But I think it is important to remember that when you're doing this, it needs to be enjoyable, it needs to be fun. And the moment that it isn't enjoyable or isn't fun is when you should stop doing it, because life is too short.
And one thing on young Tories actually is the fact that I've noticed, maybe it's just me being on social media too much, is the fact that many of them seem to be a lot more boisterous and a lot more vocal about their opinions than ever before, and a lot more boisterous in their politics. Do you think it's because of sort of like the trends of the new generation, like Gen Z or whatever coming up, or do you think it's a matter of just social media sort of being a better amplifier than generations past?
A really interesting question. It could be a multitude of things. One thing I've definitely been thinking about is I think there is a bit of a vacuum within the young Tories, given that the Young Conservatives as an organisation is quite an inactive organisation. They do the odd events, but there were, for example, several years where they didn't do any events. For example, they didn't do a single event in Wales for 3 years. Oh, so wow. It's a very inactive organisation. And I think where there is inaction, there is a power vacuum, and there will be different groups and people and loud voices that are trying to kind of get themselves heard, and you can't really blame them. So I think that's possibly why, because there's not any structure really for young Tories to sit in. They have got their YC branches, of course, but there's no executive, there's no national board that people can kind of try and rise up through the ranks in. And I think as a result of that, people probably are a bit more boisterous because they want to be heard. But my God, don't we have an incredible network of young people online, ranging from people like Emily Hewitson to Dominique Samuels, who all have differing views, but the passion with which they make their voices heard, I think, is really quite inspiring. And I think, as I said previously, there's an untapped resource of young Tories there, fighting to be heard. And that's why I think it's time for the party to kind of come in and meet these people, because the talent is incredible.
Mm-hmm. And on that, what do you think that so many young people beyond sort of the Conservative Party are perhaps more left-wing per se? Because you look at, say, the 2019 exit poll, and it showed, if I'm not mistaken, like most of the seats sort of fallen to Jeremy Corbyn, if I'm not mistaken, between the 8 to 24-year-old bracket. What do you think that might be, if you don't mind me asking?
Gosh, yeah, that is a fantastic question. It's something I have thought about loads. It's hard, I think, to pinpoint one exact reason why young people do tend to be more left-wing. But I think certainly the party isn't doing a huge amount to kind of help that at the moment. The rhetoric at the moment, if you're not hugely engaged in politics, is quite negative for young people. COVID has been quite traumatic for anybody who is under the age of 25, whatever stage of life that they're in. If they've been at university, it's been extremely disruptive. If they've been doing their A-levels, it's been extremely disruptive. If they have been in their first couple of years of their career, it's been extremely disruptive. And I think for young people, a lot of them will be asking, well, what is the point of voting for the Conservative Party right now? And we need to make sure that we've got a strong reason why. So I don't think we're helping ourselves in that respect at the moment. What the cause of it is, it's hard to say. Not helped, I think, by echo chambers online. there are still loads of shy Tories out there because they message me all the time saying, I'm a young Conservative, but I don't want to join, or they'll say, oh, I read your tweets or your Instagram posts. I do agree with you, but I wouldn't ever post anything because I'm scared of what my friends would say. So there is a little bit of that too, probably.
Mm-hmm. Do you think maybe one possibility is that in some areas of the country, I'm not talking about all areas, but in some areas, like there might be some economic problems, and therefore they might not feel the Conservative Party is very appealing to them on that sense? Because I remember watching a Ben Shapiro interview when he was interviewing Tucker Carlson, when he pointed out that in America, I know this is not necessarily the case over here, where he said that if a lot of young people can't buy a car or a house or get a necessarily a good job, then why are you surprised when a good chunk of them vote for socialism? Do you think that might be the case, that a lot of these people in certain areas around the country might feel that way and therefore might vote for the left, regardless of what other issues they may disagree with them on?
Yeah, absolutely. I think also for a long time, the left has kind of held court on a couple of issues, particularly the cost of living and the environment. Until very recently, the right didn't really have anything interesting to say about the environment. And as a result, we let small state free market solutions to the environment. And the same with the cost of living as well. Until the Conservatives raised the personal allowance, we weren't really talking in that kind of space at all. So I definitely think you're right there, definitely in terms of how we communicate, but also in London, if you are like myself, you are probably struggling to purchase a property, but you're caught in a vicious cycle whereby your rent is so expensive that you're in no position to reasonably save towards a property. And even if you do, it's in a rat race to try and catch a property because there's just such short supply. The Conservatives have an opportunity to kind of win over waning voters here by sorting out housing, given just how expensive it is. So possibly, yeah, that would explain why, London is certainly, we're really going to struggle to win that over when you've got people paying over 50% of their salary towards their rent, with no reasonable aspiration of ever owning property themselves. And that's not because owning property is necessarily what everybody wants to do in their life. It's something to stop you from hemorrhaging 50% of your salary every year on somebody else. So that is quite a Tory way of looking at housing. Why would you want to lose 50%, redistribute that wealth over to somebody else? You want to use that wealth for you. So if we fix housing, we might be able to tap into, as you said, a couple of regions where they wouldn't, for economic reasons, vote Tory. London may well be one of them.
Mm-hmm. And the final question I'll ask you on this is that why do you think that they would go from, say, stuff like economic social justice to some of the more radical sort of social views that you sometimes see in, I don't know, like some of these things that some of these politicians come out with on the left, like some of these radical social issues? Do you think, as Douglas Murray pointed out, that because an ideology that's very appealing because it talks about helping them, the fact that it can help everyone according to social justice, might be appealing on that sense, like if it can help them get a house and so on, then it should be good for everybody, sort of thing?
Yeah, you're probably right there. And I think there's something to be said for that. I think the left for a very long time, as Theresa May once said, saw themselves as having the monopolization on compassion. The only way to be compassionate was to be left wing. And that's a frankly absurd statement. So she was sort of saying, for a long time that they've claimed monopoly for that. And we must wrestle that off of the left and show that in personal responsibility and in freedom and in families, you can find a lot of strength in life. And I think some of these more hard left ideas, radical ideas, on the face of it, they sound very helpful, like for example, giving everybody a house or paying everybody the same, and being, striving for equality in its most absolute terms. Sure, on paper, that sounds probably great to someone who's not hugely engaged. But as we all know, the economics and the social impact by these things would be quite negative in some aspects. So yes, definitely. If you're not engaged hugely in politics, it probably makes sense for you to kind of sway towards those left policies, because on paper, free broadband, that sounds great.
Indeed, I suppose. But you're based in London, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Mm.
Before I move, good. And
Yes, yeah, yeah.
one thing I wanted to ask you on that front, I asked my last guest this, is that what is politics in London like now, given the fact that you have like Sadiq Khan as London mayor and all the rest of it, and it's London, it sees this more to the left than most of the country. Why do you think that might be, if you don't mind me asking?
Gosh, why might that be? I mean, to his credit, Sadiq Khan is fantastic at PR. It's what he does. He's not a mayor. He's just someone who's really good at promoting himself. In my whole life of living in London, and I include even the borderlines or slash often anti-Semitic Ken Livingstone in this, he's probably one of the worst mayors we've ever had. Job, yet continues to win down here. And I think the reasons why is just because he's so good at promoting himself. For example, he knows that going and turning up to the Anthony Joshua boxing fight is going to be really good for him. He knew that posturing over Brexit, sure, might lose him a couple of votes, but it would make that Remain vote so strong for him that it would come back and he would be able to be rewarded, in the mayoral elections. I mean, it's so frustrating being a Conservative down here because Khan is just a really dreadful mayor. I'm sure he's a lovely guy, but he's just a very bad mayor. And particularly for knife crime, it's been absolutely appalling. In my entire life of living in London, I've lived around this area most of my life. I have never known an epidemic quite like this. It is so devastating and upsetting to see so many, particularly young people being stabbed, often in broad daylight in their community. I don't get any sense of urgency from Sadiq Khan on this at all. Yet he finds urgency in his vanity projects because he knows that that's going to get his face in the Evening Standard, and that's going to get him a nice write-up by George Osborne and people in the Evening Standard, and that's going to win him the votes. So he is an extremely effective politician. So it's less about politics, it's more about us. We just need to find a way of kind of rubbing the shine off of him in some way, because he's very good at doing it.
Mm-hmm. And do you think partially the reason he might be, have so much success in London is because there's an activist sort of class that he panders to like mad, and the fact that he knows who his audience is? Because I remember being at like a Mayor's Question Time thing before the pandemics began or the lockdowns began, where Sean Bailey was pointing out that rank control might not actually work for statistical reasons, and then he bluntly responds with, "Well, Sean Bailey's against rank control," and everyone sort of ate it up in the crowd. Or when he was talking about being tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime and all the rest of it, they ate it up. Do you think it might just be he knows his audience, he panders them like mad, and they're sort of like not necessarily the majority of London, but they're the majority of the people who are going to go and vote for him? Because if I'm not mistaken, like London mayor vote counts are like less than 50% of the population of London.
Yeah, you're so right. He knows his audience and he knows who he needs to win. He knows that, for example, Hackney and places like that are going to vote for him irrespective. He doesn't need to do that much. So he puts all of his effort into the millennials. They've got quite a lot of money, and he just campaigns exclusively on socially liberal issues and making sure that he gets the right sort of sound bites in the right places, and it's extremely effective. And Sean Bailey, I think, really struggled to get through that. But if you actually look at the votes down in London, Sean performed more, outperformed everyone else's expectations. So it just goes to show London is not written off. We still have an opportunity here to win. And there are some fantastic people in the London Assembly that do a great job at holding the mayor to account every day. We just need to get better at getting them out there and telling their story, because they're really talented. And they're from across the political spectrum. We've got Andrew Boff, who's sort of a small status, very socially liberal guy, right up to, for example, people like Sean Bailey, who are probably lean a bit more right. There's a great untapped resource of people down in the assembly that we just need to get better at promoting them.
Mm-hmm. And and then Khan blames the fact that austerity is the reason crime is so high in London, even though he's in charge of the money maker. That we will.
Yeah.
Which is to the Guardian about it, writes an article. Do you think then for London it's just a matter of, do you think Bailey should run again for the 2024, if I'm not mistaken, mayoral race, or should it be someone who campaigns on similar messages but is a little bit more of a hard hitter, do you think?
Great question. It's hard to answer. I mean, Sean Bailey has got an incredible personal story, and I think that's something that would really lend him well in the mayoral election. I've also met him a couple of times. I think he's a great guy, and I think he would be a fine mayor. If that's who the party thinks is the best person to go forward, then that's great. If there's somebody else out there, that's great too. Most important thing is that we get forward a real alternative for London. And that is quite difficult to do because London is very much a bit like a pocket money parliament. It's all about spending, really. It's not so much councils to do a very, very good job at keeping council tax as low as is physically possible. So it's more challenging for us in that arena to put forward the traditionally conservative kind of case. I think definitely, sadly, the knife crime stuff has fallen on deaf ears in London. And that's largely because most people are so privileged that they probably don't see how bad knife crime is. I know that's probably a good thing that very, very few people do actually see it, but it's not emotive enough, unfortunately, to get people to vote seriously. And that was so sad about Sadiq Khan winning again is he was just so, he was just so blasé about knife crime, has no sense of urgency on it, and was delivered a majority again, despite so many young people being failed by him and the police, which he is in charge of.
Mm-hmm. And on that, we talk about like Labour being able to win London and maybe some more of these city areas. Do you think that would you agree with someone like Paul Embry, for example, who's a Labour guy and he's a very prominent in the party, or at least prominent on social media and so on? Would you agree with him that essentially the party, as the Labour Party stands now, has essentially become a party for, as he says, Twitter, for the managerial class, for student radicals, and all those sort of types? And what do you think sort of like that rot started, do you think?
Absolutely, I completely agree with that. The Labour Party is a party for middle class, educated types, for public sector workers, and for people who live in urban areas. Labour is not speaking to lower middle income people in rural areas or towns, and it is not speaking to people who are farmers and other sort of and fishermen and those kinds of roles. It hasn't got anything interesting to say to those people, and it's not talking to the elderly either. So Labour has very much become, in my eyes, a very metropolitan party. It cares very passionately about specific sets of social issues, which I don't think are top of the priority for a lot of people around the country. And I do think that they have lost their connection with what used to be their traditional core vote. But that has been coming over to us for years. It didn't just happen in 2019. That is the final climax of that vote crumbling and coming to us. It's been coming to us for ages, ever since Thatcher, to be honest. So yeah, I do agree with Paul Embry on that. And for Labour to win, what they need to do is they need to stop calling Tories scum, because they need to win those votes over. But also they need to be more open about where they've messed up in the past. If they were to be really honest and say, look, we got it wrong on Brexit. We got it really wrong. And we spent years trying to stop it from happening. And for that, we're really sorry. We should have listened to you. The same thing with immigration. I'm sorry, Ed Miliband did this a bit. You should say, look, we got it wrong on immigration. We didn't listen to your concerns and we dismissed you as racists without listening to what you had to say. And as a result, you've gone and voted elsewhere because you didn't think that we were listening to you. And I think if they start talking like that, they could definitely peel back some of that vote, because it's more centre-left, it's slash centrist on the economy, a bit more centrist, possibly centre-right on social issues. They won't, though. So
no, they won't, because otherwise Ash Sarkar and the Islington radicals might get annoyed and they might go and vote for someone else. But on that front, what do you think about people like Lord Adonis, who says like what the Labour Party really needs to do is go back to sort of like the Blair era of politics? Because it seems to me, from looking at the sort of information that's available, like ever since Blair became sort of like prime minister and so on, and sort of blowback from that's when Labour started losing a lot of its core vote, especially in more of its northern areas, like drip by drip, so to speak.
I mean, Lord Adonis is a very intelligent guy when it comes to education policy. He gave us academies. However, on this, I'm not sure how much we should listen to it, because Blair seems to be his solution to everything. However, I do think that the Labour Party could certainly win by shifting in a more centrist direction, by being more aspirational. I mean, that's one thing you can't take away from Blair, is that he was aspirational. I didn't get the sense, and obviously I was very young, but having studied at uni, I didn't get the sense of the kind of the envy of politics, the politics of envy that we do tend to get with Labour now. Labour famously bragged about how low its upper rate of taxation was. It eventually did raise it, but in those early years, it was really trying to be aspirational. And I think for Tony Blair, if you would say to Tony Blair, is it immoral to be rich? Is it immoral to want to be rich? Is it immoral to want to send your children to private school? I think he would have said no to all of those questions. I think Keir Starmer would really struggle to answer those questions, not because he doesn't know what to say. He would say no to all of them, but he's worried, I think, of what his party base would say. And you only need to look at the videos of the Labour Party conference to think, good Lord, you have got a long way to go before you look remotely electable. Mm-hmm. And if Keir really wants to do something about it, he needs to get rid of Zara Sultana and all of that lot, because they make the party look like complete idiots.
Well, good luck to that. Good luck for him to that, I suppose. But on a completely different subject, given we've been discussing ideas of conservatism, what do you think conservatism means nowadays in 2021 as a philosophy and an idea, if you don't mind me asking?
Great question. I think this is something that a lot of young Tories are asking themselves. I think definitely because we're entering a period of under Boris, and Boris is probably one of our more ambiguous sort of ideologues in the party, but also because of COVID. And I think what I found particularly upsetting during these last 2 years is just how quickly we completely shelved some of our core principles of conservatism. So I think absolutely people are probably saying, what does it mean to be a conservative now, when we essentially, nationalized huge swathes of the private industry, the private sector, and we told people to stay at home, and we told people that what they could and couldn't do, and personal responsibility went out the window. So I think people are asking, what does it mean to be a conservative now? What I would say is, to be a conservative now, I think means that you believe in the United Kingdom, you are a patriot, you are excited about our future as we have now left the European Union, and you see this as an opportunity for us to become a global country. I see that in a lot of what the government does. I think also to be a conservative now means that you want to probably address the regional disparities that we've had in this country from age time, not just economic, I mean in terms of opportunity. And also to be a conservative, I think, means that you value hard work and you value the family. I don't think those things have changed. I've not seen anything to suggest that hard work and family values are going anywhere anytime soon in the Conservative Party. Our traditionally low tax policies are possibly less so. And obviously the interventionism is definitely not a very conservative trait. But like I said, we'll have to wait and see whether or not this turned into a new kind of post-war consensus, like a post-COVID consensus, where we agree, let's have lots of state intervention, let's have higher taxes, let's have less personal responsibility. We'll have to wait and see if that's kind of what happens now, after what happened obviously during the war with the post-war settlement and the post-war consensus that Thatcher tore down. We'll have to wait and see if that's kind of what happens here.
Mm-hmm. And final two questions before I ask you the last two questions, if you don't mind me doing so. The first one being, who would you say your ideological influences are when it comes to conservatism, if you don't mind me asking, or just your political views in general?
Sure. I mean, I try my best to not kind of define myself as a set group within the party. I tried to do it before and I never found anywhere that fit for me. There are certain views of mine which are more socially conservative. There are certain views of mine which are more neoliberal. I've got definitely some One Nation Tories and some blue collar conservatism in me. I think for me, people that I'm really inspired by will always be David Cameron. I really liked the big society. I loved the idea of free schools and academies, and that's something I still passionately believe in to this day. But also, I suppose in terms of conservative thinkers, And there is an element of Burke as well. I think one thing that Edmund Burke always spoke about was wisdom, and learning from the past. That definitely sits with me. I do look back on how we've done things previously and think, was this a good way of doing them, yes or no? Should we kind of and that's actually, just to segue a bit, that's definitely influenced the way that I look at education and how education should be unequivocally a pursuit of knowledge, and a pursuit in the acquisition of knowledge and social capital. That definitely has influenced my views on education. So it's hard to fit myself in one particular place right now. People I'm very passionate about right now are Liz Truss. I see her as a defender of the small government model and low taxes, and I'll be looking very closely at what she does for the next couple of years.
Mm-hmm. And this is very on the same question, if you don't mind me doing so, is that Steve Baker, the MP, a little while ago, maybe it wasn't a little while ago, uploaded something to his Twitter where he had about 4 books where he said, "This is what we believe," referring to Thatcher when she did that with the Constitution of Liberty. Which 4 books would you put down, or if you don't mind me asking?
Gosh, oh God, I didn't prepare for this. That's a great question. What 4 books? I think definitely On Liberty. That needs to be in there. And the concept of the harm principle, I think, is something that conservatives have a very strong view on. It informs our beliefs about freedom of speech. It's the reason why we reject things where people say, you can't say X, Y, or Z, that's violence, that kind of thing. We reject that kind of idea because we sit quite further along on the harm principle. We say, look, you should be able to say things however horrendous they are in the privacy of your own home. Using that to deliberately harm is obviously different. So definitely that. Other books, I would say, Revolutions by Edmund Burke. It's actually probably a really dry book to read, but I think it's a good foundation to political knowledge. I would also probably say The Social Contract by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, not because that's necessarily what we believe in, but a critical read and to understand social contract theory, how a contract exists between government and people, because I think that's a really interesting relationship for conservatives, given that we tend to be much more skeptical of governments and skeptical of intervention in our lives. And then the 4th book, I would say, is the Conservative Party Manifesto from 2010. I think it's when we seriously started to see a change in direction for the Conservative Party. It's when we became electable. It's when we shook off the shackles of the dark party, and Michael Howard, who was described, I can't remember what he was described as someone in the night, looks like somebody in the night. That's a paraphrase there, but it's when things really started to change for us. And some of the policies in that manifesto have been hugely successful, notably education, which has been a quiet revolution in conservative policy for the last 11 years. So those would be my 4 books: On Liberty, Revolutions, The Social Contract, and the Conservative Party Manifesto.
Okay, sure. And the penultimate question I wanted to ask you, this is the title of the show, and it's why I ask everyone who comes on, is what would your ideal world be?
So I watched Jake Scott's response to this, which I thought was very interesting. My ideal world is different to his because he's much more ruralist than me. I'm more of an urbanist. I do like cities. So what I would say is my ideal world is a country which is autonomous, where the decisions that are made that affect the people's lives in that country are informed by the people who live there, and that those people have a really strong and active say over that. It would be a place where how much money your parents earn doesn't determine how good the school that you go to is, probably. Where hard work is valued, where the family is still seen as a very strong and intrinsic part of the web of society. Now, that concept of family may have changed slightly. I'm a gay man, so my concept of a family may be different to other people's, but certainly that families being the first societies is something I definitely subscribe to. That's one of the things that I think Rousseau said. So yeah, the concept of that, where you are free and you can do whatever you want within reason, without harming others, I'd say. But also that there's a sense of community too, where you feel connected to the people that you live with, you feel connected to your country. And I think the last thing I would say in my ideal society would be a place where we are not defined by our immutable characteristics. One of the things I found really troubling over the last couple of years as a gay man is to constantly be told that I'm a gay man by other people, and told as a gay man, surely you must X, Y, and Z. Surely you must believe this. Surely you must think that. I think it's scandalous that you this and why, and why don't you like this as a gay man? And I find that just awful. This idea that something like your gender, your sexuality, your hair color, whatever it could be, robs you of your agency and your individual thought. And that informs the entire way that you view the world. My utopia definitely doesn't have any of that. And it's where people vote for parties that they believe in, and they don't feel a sense of, I suppose, debt that Labour and the left tend to imply. They tend to imply that as a gay man, I've got a certain debt to pay to the left for the freedoms that I enjoy today. My utopia wouldn't have any of that. It would be focusing on what individuals do, what they say, and how they help others. I think that's what I'm more interested in life. So yeah, that was a very jumbled idea, but it's a free society where people can do what they want so long as it doesn't harm others, where they have a sense of personal responsibility and a community to those around them, but also to within the country that they live.
Thank you for coming on today, by the way. If people wanted to find more about you and your work, how can they find it? What social media links do you have?
So yeah, if you just go to my Twitter page, which is twitter.com/Black, there's a linky page there. It's got a link to some of the articles that I've written recently, as well as also some of the things that I'm involved in. I'm also the head of comms at LGBT plus Conservatives. So just type in LGBT plus Conservatives and it will take you to our page. And then obviously, if you are interested in Blue Beyond, Olivia Lever is the girl that you need to follow. So go and chat to her and ask her how you can get involved. She's absolutely fantastic. I'm sure she will listen to what you have to say.
Thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you, Edward. Have a nice day.
You too. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like and share this video, as well as subscribe to the Ed Interviews YouTube channel, and also the Ed Interviews BitChute channel, and also look at my stuff on Mixcloud as well. I'll have more of this content coming in, and also subscribe to my Patreon subscribe star as well, for more guest requests, as well as free copies of my old books. Until then, see you next time, guys.